Welcome to quiz time. I'm your quiz master, Sean, and I've got 100 questions for you. True and false. 50-50 chance at least of getting it right. Right? And all about World War II. So let's see what we know, shall we? Alright, let's get started. The invasion of Poland by Germany in 1939 marked the official start of World War II. Is that true, or is it false? And that happens to be true. France held off the German invasion for nearly 3 years before surrendering. Is that true? Or is that a fabrication? That is false. The Soviet Union was initially allied with Nazi Germany at the start of World War II. Is that true? Or is that false? In fact, the Soviet Union was allied with Nazi Germany. True. Winston Churchill was the British Prime Minister for the entire duration of the war. Is that true? Or is that false? Winston Churchill was not the Prime Minister the entire duration of the war. False. The Battle of Britain was fought primarily on the ground with tanks and infantry. Is that true, or is that false? That is false. Operation Barbarossa was Germany's plan to invade the Soviet Union. True or false? That is true. Italy remained loyal to Germany for the entire war and never switched sides. Is that true or is that false? That's false. Italy did switch sides. D-Day landings in June 1944 took place in Normandy, France. Is that true, or is that false? And that is true. The Holocaust refers to the mass genocide of Jews and other groups by Nazi Germany. Is that true, or is that false? And that is true. The United Kingdom was successfully invaded and occupied by Nazi Germany. Is that true, or is that false? The United Kingdom was not successfully invaded and occupied by Germany. False. The D-Day invasion of Normandy in 1944 was the first time Allied forces set foot in Nazi-occupied Europe during World War II. True or false? And that's false. Switzerland was heavily bombed during World War II because of its proximity to Germany. Is that true, or is that false? That's false. Blitzkrieg was a fast and aggressive military strategy used by Germany. Is that true, or is that false? Blitzkrieg was their thing. That's true. The Soviet Union was responsible for liberating Auschwitz concentration camp. Is it true, or is it false? That's true. The Soviet Union did liberate Auschwitz. Germany developed the first jet-powered fighter plane during World War II. True or not true? And that is true. Finland was an ally of Nazi Germany during the war. True or false? And that is true. The U.S. declared war on Germany before Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. Is that true? Or is it false? That's false. The Battle of Stalingrad was a major Soviet victory and a turning point in the war. True or false? That's true. The Enigma machine was a German cipher device used to encrypt messages. True or not true? And that is true. France remained under complete German occupation for the entire war. Is that true or is that false? And that is false. The Warsaw Uprising was a Polish resistance effort to liberate Warsaw from German control. Is that true or false? That's true. Spain was an official member of the Axis powers and fought alongside Germany. Is that true or is it false? That is false. True or false? Germany successfully developed and tested an atomic bomb before the United States. That's false. The Maginot Line was a series of defensive fortifications in France that completely stopped the German invasion. Is that true or is that false? It didn't stop anybody. False. The Dunkirk evacuation in 1940 rescued over 300,000 Allied troops. Is that true or is that false? That is true. Adolf Hitler was born in Germany. True or false? Adolf Hitler was not born in Germany. The Yalta Conference in 1945 helped determine post-war Europe's division and the fate of Germany. Is that true or not? That is true. Romania, Hungary, and Bulgaria were all Axis powers at some point. Is that true or is that false? And that's true. Dresden was heavily bombed by the Allies in 1945, causing massive destruction. True or false? "'Tis true." The Battle of the Bulge was Germany's final major offensive of the war. True or false? And that is true. After World War II, Berlin was divided into 3 occupation zones, controlled by the US, UK, and France. Is that true or is that false? That's false. Poland was one of the few European countries that remained neutral throughout the war. Is that true or is that false? That's false. The German battleship Bismarck was one of the most powerful warships, but was sunk in 1941. True or false? And that is true. The Soviets reached Berlin first at the end of the war. Is that true or is that false? That is true. The Holocaust only targeted Jewish people. Is that true or is that false? That is false. The Battle of Kursk in 1943 was the largest tank battle in history. Is that true or is it false? And that is true. The Soviets used a scorched earth policy to slow down the German invasion. Is that true or is that false? And that is true. The war in Europe officially ended in May 1945. True or not true? And that is true. Charles de Gaulle led the French resistance and later became the president of France. Is that true or is that false? That is true. The Nuremberg trials were held after the war to prosecute Nazi leaders for war crimes. Is that true or is that a falsehood? That is true. Japan invaded Thailand in 1941, but Thailand remained neutral throughout the war. Is that true or is it false? That is false. The Indian National Army, the INA, was created by Indian nationalists to fight alongside the British against Japan. True or false? That's false. Burma, now Myanmar, was a major battleground between Japanese forces and the Allies, with the famous Chindits conducting guerrilla warfare. True or false? That is true. China was the first country to be invaded in World War II when Japan attacked Manchuria in 1931. True or false? And that's false. The Soviet Union declared war on Japan before the United States dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. True or false? That is false. The Battle of Singapore in 1942 saw the largest surrender of British-led forces in history. True or false? And that is true. The Japanese used biological warfare against China, spreading plague and other diseases throughout Unit 731. True or false? And that is true. The Philippines was the first Allied country to be occupied by Japan during World War II. True or false? And that is false. Ethiopia was under Italian occupation before World War II began, but it was liberated by British-led forces in 1941. True or false? That's true. The Cairo Conference in 1943 determined that Korea would be divided into North and South after Japan's defeat. True or false? That is true. Japan controlled all of Indonesia after the entirety of World War II. True or false? And that is false. The Doolittle Raid in 1942 was a major bombing campaign that destroyed much of Tokyo. Is that true or is that false? That's false. Iran was neutral during World War II and was never occupied by any foreign powers. True or false? And that's false. The Bataan Death March involved American and Filipino prisoners being forced to march over 60 miles by Japanese forces. True or false? That is true. Japan never planned to invade Australia, despite expanding rapidly across the Pacific. Is that true or is that false? That is false. Operation Ichigo was Japan's largest offensive in China, aimed at seizing airfields used by the US. True or false? And that is true. The Japanese Imperial Army experimented with chemical weapons in China, despite signing international treaties banning them. True or false? That is true. The British successfully defeated Malaya against the Japanese invasion in 1941. Is that true or is that false? And that is false. The only African country to officially join the Axis powers was Libya. True or false? And that is false. Japan forced thousands of Korean women into military slavery, known as comfort women. Is that true or is that false? That is true. Tibet was heavily bombed by the Japanese during World War II due to its strategic location. Is it true or is it a falsehood? And that is false. Japan built the Burma Railway, also known as the Death Railway, using forced labor from Allied prisoners and Asian civilians. True or not true? And that is true. South Africa remained neutral during World War II. True or false? And that is false. The United States placed Japanese Americans in internment camps, but Canada did not do the same to the Japanese Canadians. Is that true or is that false? That's false. The atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima was significantly more powerful than the one dropped on Nagasaki. Is that true or is that false? And that is false. The Flying Tigers were a group of American pilots who volunteered to fight for China before the U.S. officially entered the war. Is that true or is that false? That is true. India was fully independent during World War II and did not participate in the war effort. True or false? And that is false. The Soviet Union launched a massive invasion of Manchuria in 1945, defeating the Japanese Kwantung Army. Is that true or not true? That is true. Japan surrendered immediately after the first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. Is that true or is that historically inaccurate? It's just plain false. The siege of Hong Kong lasted for over a year before the British surrendered. Is that true or is that false? And that is false. The Imperial Japanese Army continued fighting in the Philippines even after Japan's formal surrender in 1945. Is that true or is that false? And that is true. China was the only country to fight Japan in World War II without receiving aid from the Allies. Is that true or is it false? And that is false. More people died in China during World War II than in any other country except for the Soviet Union. Is that true or is that false? That is true. The Indian Ocean saw little naval combat during World War II. Is that true or is that false? That's false. Korea was occupied by Japan from 1910 until the end of World War II in 1945. Truth or not truth? That is truth. The city of Nanjing was largely unharmed during the war due to a peace agreement between Japan and China. Is that true or is that false? And that is false. The British Indian Army was the largest volunteer force in World War II. True or false? That is true. Indonesia gained its independence from Dutch rule immediately after World War II ended. True or false? And that is false. Japan used kamikaze pilots as a last-ditch effort to stop Allied advances. True or false? That is true. No Japanese soldiers refused to surrender after the war officially ended. True or false? That's false. A lot of them kept fighting. German U-boats reached the St. Lawrence River and attacked Canadian ships. True or false? That is true. Camp X was a top-secret Nazi base located in Canada. Is that true or is that false? That is false. The United States never fought a battle on its own soil during World War II. Is that true or is that false? And that is false. Japan used incendiary balloon bombs to attack North America. True or false? Incendiary balloon bombs. Very low tech. But they tried it. It's true. Newfoundland was part of Canada during World War II. Is that true or is that false? That is false. Newfoundland was not part of Canada then. The Alaska Highway was built to improve trade between Canada and the U.S. True or false? And that is false. Canada invented synthetic rubber to help the war effort. Is that true or is it false? And was that invented in Canada? Yes, it was. That is true. Germany successfully invaded part of Canada during World War II. True or false? And that is false. German prisoners of war were held in Canada during World War II. Is that true or is that false? That is true. Before World War II, the US had a military plan to invade Canada. True or not true? Why would the US have a plan to invade Canada anyway? But we did. It's true. Haiti declared war on Germany and Japan in 1941. Is that true, or is that just plain silly? It's true. The Bahamas was neutral and played no role in World War II. Is that true, or is that false? That is false. Canada's failed Deep Bay raid in 1942 was a test run for D-Day. True or false? That is true. Mexico and Cuba remained completely neutral during World War II. Is that true or is that false? That is false. The U.S. established secret military bases in the Caribbean during World War II. Is that true? Or is that false? And that is true. Most of the uranium used for the atomic bombs came from Canada. Is that true? Or is that false? And that is true. A Nazi spy successfully set up a German base in Newfoundland. True or false? And that is false. German U-boats never operated in the Caribbean. True or false? And that is false. Greenland was important to World War II because of its weather stations. Is that true or is that not true? And that is true. And now question 100. Indigenous soldiers from Canada and the US played a major role in the war. Is that true or is that false? And that is true. All right, you did an amazing job. Don't forget to like, subscribe, ring that notification bell, and share your score in the comments below, please. And check out these videos. They're a lot of fun too. We'll catch you in the next one. Bye-bye.